My name is Sophia, and at 28, I thought I knew everything about loyalty and family bonds. That assumption shattered during what should have been a simple Sunday dinner when my sister Rachel casually announced she was moving into our childhood home. The problem? She had no idea I had secretly sold it 3 months earlier. What started as an awkward family moment spiraled into the most devastating betrayal I could never have imagined. The house sale was just the beginning of uncovering lies that destroyed everything. But before we dive into this wild family revenge story, I need to know where you beautiful souls are watching from. Drop your city in the comments below, smash that like button if you are ready for some serious family drama, and hit subscribe because this story has more twists than a soap opera. Trust me, you will not want to miss what happens when family secrets collide with calculated revenge. 3 months before that fateful dinner, I was drowning in medical bills from my father's cancer treatment. Dad had been fighting stage 4 pancreatic cancer for 18 months, and despite having insurance, the experimental treatments and specialized care had depleted every savings account we had. Mom was working double shifts at the hospital where she had been a nurse for 25 years, but it still was not enough. The family house on Maple Street had been our sanctuary for 3 decades. Dad bought it when he landed his first engineering job, and Mom spent years transforming it into the perfect suburban dream. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a wraparound porch, and a backyard where we had hosted countless barbecues and birthday parties. Every corner held memories of family movie nights, Christmas mornings, and teenage heartbreaks. When the oncologist suggested a clinical trial in Houston that could potentially extend Dad's life, the cost was staggering. Insurance would not cover the experimental treatment, and we needed $40,000 upfront. Mom cried in the hospital parking lot that day, and I knew I had to do something drastic. I researched every option. Personal loans had interest rates that would crush us. Crowdfunding felt too public and humiliating for my private father. The only asset our family had was the house, and it was worth exactly what we needed. The decision felt like cutting out my own heart, but Dad's life was worth more than bricks and mortar. I handled everything quietly. Found a real estate agent who specialized in quick sales, got the house appraised, and listed it at a competitive price to ensure a fast transaction. The hardest part was convincing Mom and Dad that selling was our only viable option. Dad initially refused, saying he would rather die in his own home than burden us with debt. Mom supported him at first, but when I showed them the stark financial reality, they reluctantly agreed. The house sold to the Peterson family within 2 weeks. They were a young couple with twin toddlers who fell in love with the backyard and the neighborhood's excellent schools. I watched them walk through our home, imagining their children growing up in the same rooms where Rachel and I had once played house and fought over toys. It felt surreal to hand over keys to strangers, but Dad's health was deteriorating rapidly. We used the money for the Houston treatment, which bought Dad an additional 6 months of quality life. Those months were precious beyond measure. We took family trips he had always wanted to make, had long conversations about life and love, and created new memories that helped soften the grief when he passed away peacefully last spring. After Dad's funeral, Mom decided she wanted to downsize anyway. The house had too many memories, and maintaining it alone felt overwhelming. She moved into a cozy 2-bedroom condo closer to the hospital where she worked. We stored Dad's belongings and family heirlooms in a storage unit, planning to sort through everything when our emotions were less raw. Rachel had been living in California for the past 5 years, pursuing her dream of becoming a screenwriter. She visited during Dad's illness but never stayed long enough to fully understand our financial crisis. She knew we had medical expenses, but I had shielded her from the severity of our situation. Rachel was always the artistic dreamer of the family, and I wanted to protect her from the harsh realities we were facing. During Dad's final months, Rachel would call from Los Angeles, full of stories about auditions and networking events. She was finally gaining traction in the industry, landing small writing gigs and building connections. I was genuinely happy for her success, even as my own life was consumed by hospital visits and insurance paperwork. After the funeral, Rachel returned to California to finish a project she had been working on for months. She promised to visit more often and talked vaguely about eventually moving back east to be closer to Mom. I assumed she meant finding her own place somewhere nearby, never imagining she had other plans. The Sunday dinner where everything exploded happened during Rachel's first visit home since Dad's memorial service. She had flown in Friday evening, full of excitement about a television pilot she had helped develop. The network was interested, and she was finally earning enough money to consider leaving her tiny Los Angeles apartment. Mom had prepared all of Dad's favorite dishes as a way of honoring his memory, and we spent the early evening sharing stories and looking through photo albums. Rachel seemed more relaxed and confident than I had seen her in years. Success was clearly agreeing with her, and I felt proud of how she had persevered through years of rejection and financial instability. After dinner, as we were clearing plates and laughing about an embarrassing story from our teenage years, Rachel casually dropped the bombshell that would change everything between us forever. Rachel was loading the dishwasher when she turned to Mom and me with a bright smile and said, "I have amazing news. I have decided to move back home permanently. The pilot got picked up, and I can write remotely from anywhere. I want to be closer to you, Mom, especially after everything we have been through with Dad." Mom's face lit up with genuine joy. "Oh honey, that's wonderful. You can find a nice apartment nearby, or maybe rent a house in the old neighborhood." Rachel laughed and shook her head. "Actually, I was thinking I would just move back into our house. You know, fix it up a bit, maybe renovate the kitchen like we always talked about. It would be perfect for me to start fresh, and I could take care of all the maintenance issues that have been piling up." The plate I was holding slipped from my hands and shattered on the kitchen floor. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden silence that filled the room. Mom's smile froze, and I felt the blood drain from my face as the implications of Rachel's words sank in. "What do you mean, move back into the house?" Mom asked slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. Rachel looked between us, confusion replacing her excitement. "Our house on Maple Street. I know it has been sitting empty since you moved to the condo, Mom, but I figured it was time someone lived there again. I have enough money saved now to handle the utilities and maintenance." I found my voice, though it sounded strange and hollow. "Rachel, we need to talk." The next 20 minutes were the most difficult of my life. I had to explain to my sister that the house she was planning to call home again no longer belonged to our family. I watched her face transform from confusion to disbelief to something approaching horror as I detailed the sale, the reasons behind it, and the timeline that she had completely missed while focused on her career in California. Rachel's first reaction was denial. "That's impossible. You cannot just sell someone's childhood home without telling them. I grew up in that house too. I had a right to know." Mom tried to mediate, explaining how desperate our financial situation had become and how the sale was our only option to afford Dad's treatment. She emphasized that Rachel had been struggling financially herself at the time and could not have contributed to the medical expenses even if we had asked. Rachel's denial quickly morphed into anger. "You should have told me. I could have figured something out. I could have taken out loans or found investors for my projects. You made a unilateral decision about something that belonged to all of us." I tried to remain calm, but her accusations stung. "Rachel, you were barely making rent in that studio apartment. You were eating ramen noodles for dinner most nights and could not even afford to fly home for Dad's birthday. What exactly would you have done to help us raise $40,000 in 2 weeks?" "That's not the point," she shouted, her face flushed with indignation. "The point is that you excluded me from one of the biggest decisions in our family's history. You treated me like a child who couldn't handle adult responsibilities." Mom stepped between us, her nurse training kicking in as she tried to de-escalate the situation. "Girls, please. This is not what your father would have wanted. We were all doing our best in an impossible situation." But Rachel was beyond reasoning. She accused me of being controlling and manipulative, of using Dad's illness as an excuse to make decisions I had no right to make alone. She claimed I had always resented her artistic pursuits and saw this as an opportunity to punish her for not following a more conventional path. Her words cut deep because they contained a grain of truth I was not ready to acknowledge. There had been moments during Dad's illness when I felt angry that Rachel was pursuing her dreams in California while I was handling all the medical crisis management alone. I had convinced myself I was protecting her, but perhaps part of me had also been punishing her for her absence. The argument escalated until Rachel stormed out, saying she needed to see the house for herself and understand what we had done. She drove to Maple Street that night and sat in her car outside the home where the Peterson family was now living. She later told me she watched through the windows as the children played in what used to be her bedroom, and the reality finally hit her. When she returned to Mom's condo near midnight, her anger had transformed into something colder and more calculating. She did not yell or cry. Instead, she sat down at the kitchen table and calmly informed us that she would be staying in town indefinitely to reassess the family situation. Over the next few days, Rachel began asking pointed questions about the house sale. She wanted to see all the paperwork, understand the exact timeline, and know every detail about how the decision had been made. She contacted the real estate agent, researched property values, and even drove by the house multiple times to observe the new family. I initially thought she was simply processing her grief and trying to understand what had happened. I was patient with her questions and transparent about every aspect of the sale. I even showed her the medical bills and insurance statements that had necessitated such drastic action. But Rachel's behavior grew stranger as the week progressed. She started making comments about family loyalty and protecting what belongs to us. She questioned whether we had really exhausted all other options and suggested that maybe we had been too hasty in our decision-making. The turning point came when she asked me point-blank if I thought I had the right to sell her inheritance without her consent. Rachel's question about inheritance rights should have been my first warning sign, but I was too focused on helping her process her grief to see the danger approaching. She had scheduled a meeting with a family law attorney, claiming she needed to understand her legal options regarding the house sale. I assumed she wanted closure or perhaps validation that we had made the right decision under impossible circumstances. What I discovered 3 weeks later turned my understanding of my sister upside down and shattered every assumption I had about family loyalty. It started when Mom received a strange phone call from the Peterson family. Mrs. Peterson sounded confused and slightly distressed as she explained that a woman claiming to be the previous owner's daughter had been contacting them repeatedly. This woman had asked detailed questions about their purchase agreement, whether they had encountered any problems with the sale, and if they had been pressured into buying quickly. Mrs. Peterson said the woman had been polite but persistent, and they were starting to feel uncomfortable with her inquiries. She wanted to know if there was some kind of dispute about the property that they should be concerned about as the new owners. Mom called me immediately, her voice shaking with worry. "Sophia, what is Rachel doing? The Petersons are scared that there might be legal problems with their house purchase." I drove straight to Mom's condo, where Rachel was supposedly staying while she sorted out her living situation. When I arrived, she was not there, but her laptop was open on the kitchen table. What I saw on her screen made my stomach drop. Rachel had multiple browser tabs open, all related to property law and inheritance disputes. She had been researching precedents for challenging family property sales, looking into statutes of limitations for contesting real estate transactions, and investigating whether adult children had any legal recourse when parents sold family homes without their explicit consent. But the most damning evidence was an email thread I could see in her inbox. Rachel had been corresponding with the same attorney she claimed to have consulted for informational purposes, but these emails revealed a much more sinister agenda. She was actively building a case to challenge the house sale and force the Peterson family to return the property to our family. The attorney's latest email outlined a strategy that made my blood run cold. They were planning to argue that Mom had been under duress during Dad's illness and that I had manipulated her into making a decision she was not mentally capable of making. They would claim that the sale was fraudulent because it was completed without proper family consultation and that Rachel's inheritance rights had been violated. Even worse, Rachel had been documenting every conversation we had about the sale, recording details about Mom's emotional state during Dad's illness, and building a narrative that painted me as a manipulative daughter who had taken advantage of our family's crisis for personal gain. I screenshot the emails and closed the laptop, my hands trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. This was not grief or confusion about family decisions. This was a calculated attack designed to destroy the Peterson family's peace of mind and potentially force them into expensive legal battles to defend their legitimate purchase. When Rachel returned that evening, I confronted her directly. She did not deny what she was doing, and her explanation was even more shocking than I had anticipated. "You stole my inheritance," she said calmly, as if stating a simple fact. "That house was supposed to be mine someday. Dad always said it would stay in the family forever, and you had no right to sell it just because you were too lazy to find other solutions." I stared at her in disbelief. "Rachel, Dad was dying. We needed $40,000 in 2 weeks, or he would not have been eligible for the clinical trial. What other solution existed that I was too lazy to pursue?" She had clearly prepared for this conversation. "You could have taken out a loan against the house instead of selling it outright. You could have started a crowdfunding campaign. You could have asked Dad's work colleagues or church friends for help. You chose the nuclear option because it was easier for you." Her accusations were not just hurtful, they were completely divorced from reality. We had explored every option she mentioned. The bank would not approve a loan large enough to cover the medical expenses because Dad's income had stopped when he became too sick to work. Crowdfunding would have taken months to generate serious money, and Dad did not have months. His colleagues and church friends were already contributing what they could, but it was nowhere near enough. "You are rewriting history," I told her. "You know we had no other choice." Rachel's response revealed the depth of her selfishness and the extent to which she had convinced herself that she was the victim in this situation. Maybe Dad dying sooner would have been better than losing the house. At least then we would still have something left of our family legacy. The words hung in the air between us like a physical blow. I could not believe my sister had just suggested that our father's life was worth less than a piece of property. Mom, who had been listening from the hallway, gasped audibly and came into the room with tears streaming down her face. "How can you say something so cruel?" Mom whispered. "That house was just wood and brick. Your father was my husband and your dad. How can you even compare them?" Rachel remained defiant. "Easy for you to say. You got 30 years of marriage and memories. I got nothing except watching my inheritance disappear because you two panicked instead of thinking strategically." That night, I made copies of all Rachel's correspondence with the attorney and began documenting every conversation we had about her plans. If she was going to wage war against our family's desperate attempt to save Dad's life, I needed to be prepared to defend our actions and protect the innocent family who had legitimately purchased our home. But Rachel's betrayal ran deeper than I initially realized. Over the following days, I discovered she had been reaching out to other family members, Dad's former colleagues, and even some of our old neighbors, spreading a version of events that painted Mom and me as greedy opportunists who had manipulated a sick man into giving up his most precious possession. She told anyone who would listen that we had hidden this sale from her deliberately, that we had refused to explore alternatives, and that we had pressured Dad into agreeing when he was too weak and medicated to think clearly. She implied that we had somehow benefited financially from the transaction, even though every penny had gone directly to medical expenses. The most painful part was watching how effectively her lies were working. People who had known our family for decades began looking at me differently. Some of Dad's old friends started avoiding Mom at the grocery store. Our elderly neighbors, who had always been like surrogate grandparents to us, began treating us with suspicion and disappointment. Rachel's campaign of manipulation was sophisticated and deliberate. She was not just trying to get the house back, she was systematically destroying our reputation in the community where we had lived our entire lives. Every relationship Mom and I had built over the years was becoming collateral damage in Rachel's quest for what she believed was rightfully hers. But Rachel had made one crucial mistake in her scorched earth approach to family warfare. She had underestimated how thoroughly I had documented every aspect of Dad's illness and our financial crisis. She also did not realize that her attorney's strategy had some significant legal vulnerabilities that I was prepared to exploit. If Rachel wanted to play games with our family's reputation and the Peterson family's peace of mind, I was ready to show her exactly what she was up against. I spent the next 2 weeks building an airtight defense that would not only protect the Peterson family from Rachel's harassment but also expose her manipulation to everyone she had been lying to. As a project manager for a tech company, I knew how to organize information systematically and present compelling evidence. Rachel had chosen the wrong sister to wage war against. My first step was contacting the Peterson family directly to explain what was happening and assure them that Rachel had no legal standing whatsoever. I provided them with copies of all the sale documents, proof of our medical expenses, and documentation showing that the sale had been completed with full legal authority and transparent financial necessity. Mrs. Peterson was relieved to learn that her family was not in any real legal jeopardy. Next, I reached out to Dad's oncologist, Dr. Martinez, who had treated him for the entire 18 months of his illness. Dr. Martinez agreed to provide a detailed written statement about Dad's condition, the urgency of the clinical trial timeline, and the specific financial requirements that had necessitated immediate action. His medical testimony would demolish any claims that we had acted hastily or without proper consideration. I also contacted our financial advisor, who had helped us explore every possible option before concluding that selling the house was our only viable solution. He provided documentation showing that we had investigated home equity loans, personal loans, and even borrowing against Dad's life insurance policy. Every conventional funding source had been either unavailable or insufficient for our needs. But my most powerful weapon against Rachel's lies was something she had no idea existed: recordings. During Dad's illness, I had started recording our family meetings about medical decisions and financial planning. Initially, I did this to help Mom and me remember complex medical information and treatment options. Dad's medications sometimes affected his memory and concentration, so having recordings helped us review important conversations later and ensure we were all on the same page. These recordings captured every discussion about selling the house, including Dad's initial resistance, Mom's concerns, and ultimately their joint decision that the sale was necessary to give Dad the best possible chance of extended life. The recordings proved beyond any doubt that both parents had been mentally competent and fully informed throughout the entire decision-making process. More importantly, the recordings included several conversations where Rachel had been on speakerphone, participating in discussions about Dad's treatment options and expressing support for whatever decisions we felt were necessary. In one particularly damning recording from 2 months before the sale, Rachel explicitly told Dad that she trusted Mom and me to handle all the financial aspects of his care because she was not in a position to help. Armed with this evidence, I scheduled individual meetings with every person Rachel had contacted with her twisted version of events. I started with Dad's former colleagues, presenting them with the medical documentation and recordings that proved our decision-making process had been both necessary and responsible. The reaction was immediate and decisive. Dad's best friend from work, who had initially seemed sympathetic to Rachel's claims, listened to just 5 minutes of recorded conversation before shaking his head in disgust. "Your sister is either completely delusional or deliberately malicious," he told me. "These recordings make it crystal clear that you and your mom did everything possible to save your dad's life. Anyone who suggests otherwise is either lying or stupid." I systematically worked through Rachel's contact list, providing evidence and context that completely undermined her narrative. Our elderly neighbors were particularly upset when they learned how Rachel had manipulated their emotions and used their genuine concern for our family to spread lies about our character. Mrs. Chen, who had lived next door for 20 years, was furious. "That girl had me convinced you two had somehow tricked your poor father into giving up his home. I was ready to drive over to your mom's condo and give her a piece of my mind. I feel terrible for doubting you." But my most satisfying confrontation was with Rachel's attorney. I requested a meeting under the pretense of wanting to understand Rachel's legal position and potentially negotiate a settlement. The attorney clearly expected to intimidate me with legal jargon and threats of expensive litigation. Instead, I presented him with a comprehensive file containing medical records, financial documentation, recorded conversations, and signed statements from multiple witnesses. I explained calmly that any attempt to challenge the house sale would not only fail spectacularly but would also expose Rachel to potential countersuits for harassment, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The attorney's demeanor changed completely as he reviewed my evidence. By the end of our meeting, he was advising me about Rachel's potential legal vulnerabilities rather than threatening me with frivolous lawsuits. "Your sister has been less than forthcoming about the circumstances surrounding this property sale," he admitted. "Based on what you have shown me today, she has no viable legal claim whatsoever. I will be withdrawing from her case immediately." Rachel's reaction to losing her attorney was explosive. She accused me of bribing him, threatening him, or somehow manipulating the legal system to protect my own interests. She could not accept that her case was simply meritless and that her behavior had been unconscionably selfish. Our final confrontation happened at Mom's condo, where Rachel had been staying throughout her campaign of family destruction. I presented her with copies of everything I had gathered, the medical records, financial documents, recordings, and witness statements that proved beyond doubt that our decision to sell the house had been both necessary and morally justified. "This ends now," I told her firmly. "You will stop harassing the Peterson family, you will stop spreading lies about Mom and me, and you will acknowledge publicly that the house sale was legitimate and necessary." Rachel's response revealed the full extent of her narcissism and self-centeredness. Even when confronted with overwhelming evidence of our family's crisis and her own manipulative behavior, she remained convinced that she was the victim. "You are all ganging up on me," she said, tears of self-pity streaming down her face. "I lost my father and my childhood home in the same year, and instead of supporting me, you are attacking me for having normal human emotions about it." I realized in that moment that Rachel was incapable of acknowledging the pain and sacrifice that Mom and I had endured during Dad's illness. She had rewritten history in her mind to center herself as the primary victim, completely ignoring the 18 months of emotional agony we had experienced watching Dad fight for his life. Rachel's world began crumbling within 48 hours of our final confrontation. The attorney's withdrawal from her case was just the beginning of a cascade of consequences that would fundamentally alter her life and relationships. The first domino to fall was her television project. During her weeks of obsessing over the house sale and building her legal case, Rachel had been neglecting her professional responsibilities. The production company had been trying to reach her for script revisions and collaborative meetings, but she had been too consumed with her revenge plans to respond appropriately. When the executive producer finally reached her, Rachel was forced to admit that she had been dealing with family legal issues that had prevented her from focusing on work. The producer was understanding initially, but when Rachel asked for an extended leave of absence to pursue litigation against her own family, the conversation took a decidedly different tone. "We need writers who can meet deadlines and maintain professional focus," the producer explained. "Family problems are understandable, but if you cannot commit to the project timeline, we need to find someone who can." Rachel lost the television writing contract that had been her ticket to financial stability and creative recognition. The opportunity she had worked years to achieve vanished because she had prioritized her petty grievances over professional obligations. The loss of income forced Rachel to confront some uncomfortable financial realities. Her savings account, which she had claimed could have helped with Dad's medical expenses, was actually far smaller than she had led us to believe. The apartment she had been renting in Los Angeles required a 30-day notice for lease termination, and breaking the lease early would cost her nearly $3,000 in penalties. With no job, minimal savings, and a destroyed relationship with her family, Rachel found herself in the exact financial predicament she had accused Mom and me of creating unnecessarily. The irony was not lost on anyone who knew the full story. But Rachel's problems extended far beyond money. Word of her behavior had spread throughout our extended family network, and the response was universally negative. Our cousins, aunts, and uncles had all heard about Rachel's attempt to challenge Dad's medical treatment decisions and her harassment of the family who bought our house. Uncle Paul, Dad's older brother who had always been Rachel's favorite relative, called her directly to express his disappointment. "Your father was my baby brother," he told her. "The fact that you would question decisions made to extend his life, or suggest that a house was more important than giving him every possible chance to survive, makes me sick to my stomach." Aunt Linda, Mom's sister who had helped care for Dad during his final weeks, was even more direct. "You have dishonored your father's memory and caused unnecessary pain to your mother during her grief. I cannot have someone with your values around my family." One by one, Rachel found herself cut off from the extended family relationships that had provided emotional support and connection throughout her life. Her actions had branded her as selfish, manipulative, and fundamentally untrustworthy. The social consequences in our hometown were equally devastating. Rachel had grown up in this community, attended high school here, and maintained friendships with people she had known since childhood. Her lies about Mom and me had initially generated sympathy, but when the truth emerged, that sympathy transformed into disgust and social ostracism. Her former high school friends stopped returning her calls. The local coffee shop where she had been working on her writing projects during her visit became uncomfortable when other customers recognized her as that woman who tried to steal back a house her family sold to save her dying father. Rachel's attempts to rebuild her reputation only made things worse. She posted a long, rambling explanation on social media that painted herself as a misunderstood daughter who had simply been trying to preserve family legacy. The post backfired spectacularly when people who knew the real story shared the medical documentation and timeline that proved her claims were fabricated. The comments section became a brutal indictment of her character. Former friends, family members, and even strangers who had heard about her behavior expressed shock and disappointment at her selfishness. The post was eventually deleted, but screenshots had already been shared widely enough to ensure permanent damage to her online reputation. Perhaps the most devastating consequence was Rachel's complete isolation from Mom. The woman who had given birth to her, raised her, and supported her dreams through years of financial struggle could no longer bear to be in the same room with her. "I feel like I failed as a mother," Mom confided to me through tears. "How did I raise someone who could be so cruel and self-centered? How did she become someone who would cause pain to grieving strangers just to get revenge for imaginary wrongs?" Mom's heartbreak was the hardest part of this entire situation. She was already grieving Dad's death and adjusting to life as a widow. Rachel's betrayal had added layers of pain and confusion that seemed almost unbearable for a woman who had always prioritized family harmony and unconditional love. The final blow to Rachel's collapsing world came when she was forced to move out of Mom's condo. Her presence had become too emotionally toxic for Mom to handle, and their interactions had devolved into either hostile silence or painful arguments about loyalty and family responsibility. Rachel had nowhere to go. Her Los Angeles apartment was no longer available, she had no job prospects that could provide immediate income, and she had systematically destroyed her relationships with everyone who might have offered temporary support. She ended up moving into an extended-stay hotel 40 miles away, paying weekly rates that quickly depleted her remaining savings. The woman who had been so concerned about preserving family wealth had managed to render herself essentially homeless and financially desperate through her own vindictive choices. But even in her reduced circumstances, Rachel remained convinced that she was the victim of an elaborate conspiracy rather than the architect of her own downfall. She continued to believe that the house sale had been wrong, that Mom and I had manipulated the situation for personal gain, and that everyone who condemned her behavior was simply too blind to see the truth. Her inability to accept responsibility for the pain she had caused, or to acknowledge the legitimacy of our medical crisis, meant that reconciliation was impossible. Rachel had not just lost her family relationships. She had burned them so thoroughly that rebuilding would require a fundamental transformation of her character that seemed unlikely to ever occur. 6 months after Rachel's scorched earth campaign against our family, the dust had settled in ways that revealed profound truths about loyalty, character, and what family really means. The resolution was not what anyone might have expected, but it was exactly what everyone involved deserved. The Peterson family, who had been innocent victims in Rachel's revenge fantasy, became unlikely allies and eventually close friends. Mrs. Peterson reached out to Mom and me after learning the full story of Dad's illness and our financial crisis. She was appalled that anyone would try to punish a family for making desperate sacrifices to save a loved one's life. "We have 2 young children," she told us over coffee at their kitchen table, the same kitchen where Mom had made thousands of family meals. "If one of them ever got seriously ill, I hope we would have the courage to make the same decisions you made. Your sister's behavior was unconscionable." The Peterson family invited Mom and me to visit the house whenever we wanted to see how they were caring for it. They had painted Dad's old workshop a cheerful yellow and converted it into a playroom for their twins. The backyard where Rachel and I had played as children now hosted elaborate sandbox constructions and bicycle riding lessons. Seeing the house filled with laughter and new memories was healing in ways I had not anticipated. Instead of feeling grief over what we had lost, I felt peace knowing that the place where we had been so happy was creating happiness for another family. Dad would have loved watching those little children discover the joy of climbing the same oak tree where Rachel and I had built countless imaginary worlds. Mom found unexpected comfort in her new relationship with the Petersons. They often invited her for holiday dinners and treated her like an honorary grandmother to their children. She helped Mrs. Peterson plant a garden in the spot where Dad's roses used to bloom, and she told stories about our family's history to children who listened with wide-eyed fascination. "It is strange," Mom told me one evening after returning from dinner at the Peterson house. "I thought selling that house meant losing all connection to your father's memory. Instead, I feel like his spirit of generosity and family love is alive there in new ways." The community support that emerged after Rachel's lies were exposed was overwhelming and deeply moving. Dad's former colleagues established a memorial scholarship in his name for children of families facing medical crises. The scholarship fund would help prevent other families from having to choose between medical treatment and financial stability. Our church organized a fundraiser that generated enough money to fully fund the scholarship's first year. Even people who barely knew our family contributed because they were moved by the story of parents willing to sacrifice everything for their child's chance at survival. Dr. Martinez, Dad's oncologist, asked permission to include our story in a presentation he was preparing about the financial barriers that prevent patients from accessing life-saving treatments. He wanted other medical professionals to understand how devastating the costs can be for middle-class families who appear financially stable on paper but cannot absorb the shock of catastrophic medical expenses. "Your family's willingness to make such a profound sacrifice gave your father 6 additional months of life and created memories that will sustain you forever," he told us. That is the kind of love that should be celebrated, not questioned. As for Rachel, the consequences of her actions continued to unfold in predictable ways. Her attempts to restart her writing career were hampered by the professional relationships she had damaged during her obsessive pursuit of revenge. The entertainment industry is smaller than people realize, and word spreads quickly about writers who cannot maintain professional focus or reliability. She eventually found work as a freelance content writer for corporate websites, a significant step down from the television projects she had been pursuing. The steady but uninspiring work provided basic income but none of the creative fulfillment or professional recognition she had been seeking in Los Angeles. Rachel's isolation from our family became permanent by her own choice. She never apologized for the pain she had caused or acknowledged that our decisions during Dad's illness had been both necessary and loving. Instead, she seemed to retreat into an alternate reality where she remained the wronged party in a story of family betrayal. Occasionally, mutual acquaintances would update us on Rachel's situation. She had moved to a different state, apparently seeking a fresh start where people did not know about her behavior during our family crisis. But even in her new location, she seemed unable to build lasting relationships or achieve the professional success she felt she deserved. "Some people never learn," Mom observed sadly. Rachel chose revenge over love, selfishness over sacrifice, and pride over family. Those choices have consequences that follow you wherever you go. The most unexpected gift from this painful experience was the deepening of my relationship with Mom. We had always been close, but going through Dad's illness together and then weathering Rachel's betrayal had created a bond that felt unbreakable. We understood each other's strength and vulnerability in ways that only shared crisis can teach. Mom decided to volunteer with families facing medical bankruptcies, using her nursing background and our personal experience to help people navigate impossible financial decisions. Her work gave new purpose to her retirement years and helped transform our family's trauma into a source of healing for others. Looking back on the 18 months from Dad's diagnosis to Rachel's final departure from our lives, I realized that crisis reveals character in ways that ordinary circumstances never can. Dad faced his terminal illness with grace and courage. Mom sacrificed her own comfort repeatedly to care for him. I learned that love sometimes requires making decisions that feel like losing everything to preserve what matters most. Rachel revealed that her love was conditional on personal benefit and that she was willing to cause tremendous pain to innocent people when she felt wronged. Those revelations were devastating but also liberating. We no longer had to wonder why family relationships felt strained or question whether we were expecting too much from someone who simply was not capable of putting family before self-interest. The story ended not with dramatic reconciliation or revenge satisfaction, but with quiet understanding about what family really means. Family is not just shared DNA or childhood memories. Family is the people who show up during crisis, who make sacrifices without keeping score, and who choose love over personal convenience when the stakes are highest. The Petersons became family. Dad's medical team became family. Our community of friends and neighbors became family. These chosen family members proved that loyalty and love are not inherited but earned through consistent actions and genuine care. Have you ever had to make an impossible choice to save someone you love, only to have family members question your decisions later? Have you experienced the pain of discovering that someone you trusted was willing to prioritize their own interests over your family's crisis? Drop a comment below sharing your own experiences with family loyalty and betrayal. I read every single one and your stories help other people feel less alone in their struggles. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help other people find it, subscribe for more real-life family drama stories that explore the complexities of loyalty and love, and share this video with anyone who might need to hear that sometimes the hardest family decisions are also the most loving ones. Thank you for listening to my story and for being part of this community where we can talk honestly about the messy, complicated, but ultimately beautiful reality of what it means to choose love over everything else. Remember that your worth is not determined by how others treat you, but by how you treat others when everything is falling apart. Take care of yourselves and the people who truly matter in your lives.